He sat there in silence. Not because he was guilty, but because he'd learned what happens when a black man speaks too soon. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters scribbled notes, the prosecutor smiled like the case was already won, and Elijah Brooks, 22 years old, first-generation college student, kept his head down, hands clasped, like prayer was the only thing he had left. The judge looked over her glasses. "Are you prepared to proceed, Mr. Brooks?" He stood slowly, heart pounding. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm not taking the deal." That one sentence made the room go still. And what happened next would shatter everything they thought they had on him. 2 months earlier, Elijah's life had looked very different. He was finishing his senior year at Clark Atlanta University, double major in computer science and criminal justice. Ironic, really, given what was coming. He was the kind of guy who held doors open, stayed after class to help other students, and worked nights at a tech repair shop just to help his mom pay her rent back home in Macon. But on a warm Friday night in March, all of that came crashing down. A friend had invited him to a house party. Just music, drinks, and good vibes. Elijah wasn't one for big crowds, but he went. That night, cops raided the house on a tip about stolen electronics and an illegal weapon. Everyone scrambled. Elijah stayed still, he knew better. But when the dust settled, he was the only one they didn't let go. "Found your print on this," the officer said, holding up a cracked MacBook. "You're under arrest." They charged Elijah with felony possession of stolen property and unlawful possession of a firearm, both found in a room he'd never entered, items he'd never touched. At the arraignment, the prosecutor barely looked at him. "We're offering 6 months, she said casually, like it was a favor. "Plead guilty and walk out before the end of summer." Elijah blinked. "But I didn't do it." She leaned forward. "Then go to trial. And when you lose, you'll do 25. The choice was simple, but not fair. Back in his cell, Elijah called his mom. She cried, "Baby, please just come home. Don't let them take you away." He wanted to. But something in him, something deep, kept whispering, "You didn't come this far to plead guilty to a lie." Over the next few weeks, the pressure got worse. His court-appointed attorney didn't believe him at first. "Look, Elijah," he said, flipping through the paperwork, "you're a young black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've seen this play out 100 times. Just take the plea." But Elijah wouldn't bend. It wasn't just pride, it was truth. The laptop they found wasn't his. The gun didn't have his prints. And the people at the party, they weren't talking. Everyone else had walked. He was the scapegoat. Still, the prosecution painted a neat picture. Elijah was tech-savvy. Maybe he knew how to erase evidence. Maybe he was smarter than the rest. Maybe he hid things better. And maybe he was exactly what they'd always expected from a young black man in Atlanta with ambition. A problem in disguise. Locked up for 38 days awaiting trial, Elijah started reading his own case file. Again and again. Line by line. Something wasn't right. The arresting officer's report mentioned finding the MacBook within 3 minutes of entering the house. But the timestamps from the body cam footage, what little his attorney could get, told a different story. It was recorded before Elijah even arrived. Still, his lawyer said, "It's circumstantial. It won't hold." That night, Elijah sat in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He remembered something his late father once told him. "Sometimes, son, silence ain't weakness. It's waiting for the right moment to speak." The day of the trial felt heavy. As he entered the courtroom, people looked at him like he was already sentenced. He wore a cheap suit from his public defender and shoes that didn't quite fit. But he walked straight. The prosecution went first. "Elijah Brooks is smart," the DA said. "He knows how to hide behind his good grades and polite smile. But evidence doesn't lie. His fingerprint on stolen property? His proximity to an illegal weapon? This isn't a misunderstanding. It's calculated." The jury watched Elijah closely. No emotion. No reaction. His lawyer rose slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what if I told you the story you just heard was designed to win, not to tell the truth?" And then, something unexpected happened. The defense requested a recess to submit a newly discovered file, one that had just been sent anonymously to the lawyer's office the night before. An unedited version of the full body cam footage. Not 3 minutes in. 17. And in that first frame, an officer, gloveless, touching the laptop with his bare hand. The judge paused, looked down at the prosecution. Why wasn't this submitted in discovery? The DA's lips parted, but nothing came out. The room fell quiet. Elijah looked over at the jury. For the first time, their eyes met his. Not as a suspect, but as a question. The judge leaned back in her seat. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. And as the bailiff called order, one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Elijah anymore. The truth had entered the room. And someone was going to pay for trying to keep it out. He wasn't supposed to fight back. Elijah Brooks, young, black, and brilliant, was supposed to take the plea, disappear into the system, and be just another statistic in a courtroom too busy to care. But yesterday something changed. The body cam footage they never wanted seen got into the hands of his defense. And now, with a shaky courtroom and a silent prosecution, Elijah wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing the truth they tried to bury. The next morning, the courtroom was full. Reporters, students, community activists. They all came to see the case they were told didn't matter. Elijah walked in slow, composed. But inside, his chest was pounding. The footage had shifted everything, because it showed the laptop being handled before he ever entered the house. And the officer's glove? The judge cleared her throat. Counselor, are you prepared to authenticate this evidence? His public defender nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The metadata matches the initial report timestamp, except the actions shown do not. The prosecutor stood jaw tight. We object to its admission. Chain of custody is unclear and... The judge raised a hand. Overruled. You could feel the shift in the room. For the first time, Elijah had power. The prosecution called Officer Reynolds to the stand. He was confident, until the defense pulled up the unedited video. Officer, the lawyer asked, can you confirm that's you entering the premises at 11:14 p.m.? Yes. And that's you touching the laptop without gloves, correct? The officer shifted. I was securing evidence. But you didn't wear gloves. You didn't log the time. And you claimed this laptop was found after the house was cleared? Correct. The room held its breath. Reynolds looked to the DA's table, searching for help. None came. That's not how I remember it, he muttered. A gasp from the gallery. The judge called for order. Elijah sat still, but behind his eyes was fire. That afternoon, the DA requested a sidebar. A private discussion. They offered a new deal. Misdemeanor charge. Time served. Walk free today. Elijah looked at his lawyer, then shook his head. No. The courtroom watched in disbelief. You're refusing again? His attorney whispered. Elijah stared straight ahead. If I take a deal now, they get to pretend this never happened. And that's what they wanted. Because it wasn't just about his case anymore. This was about every name that never got a chance to say, I didn't do it. Day 3. The defense called their surprise witness. Her name was LaShonda Miller. A party guest. Quiet, reserved. She hadn't spoken until now because she feared retaliation. But she'd seen what happened. I saw the cops plant that laptop, she said, voice trembling. They brought it in themselves. It wasn't even from the party. Gasps again. Why didn't you come forward before? I was scared. But Elijah, he doesn't deserve this. Nobody does. The jury leaned in. Every eye locked on her. The prosecution tried to discredit her. She's not credible. No video. No proof. But the damage was done. Her words weren't evidence. They were revelation. Closing arguments were tense. The prosecution scrambled to piece their case back together, like shattered glass. The defense simply asked one question. If you were him, young, black, and alone, would you still believe this was justice? The courtroom went quiet. And as the jury filed out to deliberate, Elijah finally exhaled. Not because he knew he'd win, but because, for once, the truth had been heard. 6 hours passed. Then 7. Then 10. The jury returned at 8:03 p.m. The foreperson handed the envelope to the bailiff. Elijah rose. His hands were shaking. The judge opened it. Read it silently. Looked up. Elijah Brooks is hereby. Elijah Brooks refused to fold. They gave him deals, they gave him pressure, but what they didn't give him was justice. Now, after explosive testimony, hidden footage, and a courtroom gripped in silence, the jury has returned. And the judge is about to speak. Everything he's fought for, his future, his freedom, his name, hinges on one word. Guilty. Or not. The courtroom was so still you could hear hearts beating. Elijah stood, sweat running down his spine. The judge looked at the jury. Mr. Foreperson, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? Yes, Your Honor. She nodded. Please read it aloud. The foreperson stood slowly, glanced toward Elijah, then back at the paper in his hands. On the count of felony possession of stolen property, we find the defendant not guilty. A breath of air left Elijah's lungs. On the count of unlawful possession of a firearm, we find the defendant not guilty. The room erupted. A wave of shock, then emotion. His mother cried out in the gallery, falling into the arms of her neighbor. Elijah didn't move. He couldn't. He was frozen in place, too stunned to process that, for once, the system had listened. He walked out of the courtroom to a crowd of reporters, flashing cameras, and chants of justice for Elijah. But this wasn't just his win. This was a message to every young black man who had been told to shut up, take the deal, and accept the label. He walked down the courthouse steps with his lawyer beside him, reporters pushing microphones in his face. How does it feel to be free? He paused, looked into the lens of one camera. I was never supposed to be in there. Days passed, then weeks. News stations covered the trial nonstop. Activists praised his courage. A GoFundMe for his education raised over $85,000. But not everything was whole again. Elijah had missed graduation, lost his job. His record still had the arrest on file. And the officers? They were still on duty. I want accountability, he said in a local interview. Not just for me, but for all of us. That's when something unexpected happened. A quiet internal affairs probe turned public. Body cam footage was reviewed. Testimonies re-examined. Officer Reynolds was placed on administrative leave. And the district attorney? Under formal review for failure to disclose critical evidence. Still, Elijah wasn't satisfied. They tried to end my life with a signature, he said. There has to be more than a slap on the wrist. Then came the twist no one saw coming. A private attorney approached Elijah's family with an offer. A civil lawsuit. Against the city. Against the department. Against everyone who played a role in trying to silence him. But there was risk. Dragging it out in court could mean more pain. More spotlight. And a system ready to protect itself. His mother was hesitant. Maybe it's enough, baby. Maybe we just move on. But Elijah's eyes were firm. If I don't fight, someone else ends up in my cell. He sat across from his lawyer, documents on the table. Once you sign this, the attorney said, there's no turning back. They're going to come for you. Hard. Elijah picked up the pen, looked at the dotted line, and just before he pressed it down, the door behind him opened. A man in a suit walked in, badge on his belt, folder in his hand. I think you're going to want to see this, he said. Elijah turned. Elijah Brooks wasn't supposed to win. They thought the badge, the courtroom, and the silence would bury the truth. But he stood tall, refused the plea, held on when the system tried to break him. And now, after a tense trial, corrupt cops, and one brave witness, the moment has arrived. The jury's verdict is in. The judge's voice sliced through the silence. On the charge of felony possession of stolen property, we find the defendant not guilty. Elijah didn't breathe. On the charge of unlawful firearm possession, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. His mother screamed. A stranger cried. Elijah lowered his head, eyes full. Not in weakness, but in relief. It was over. He hadn't just won the case. He'd taken back his name. As Elijah walked out of the courthouse, his body felt weightless, but the world around him buzzed. Cameras, news vans, protest signs. One reporter leaned in. Elijah, how do you feel? He paused, looked dead into the lens. I feel like the system tried to erase me, and I'm still here. And then he walked, not like a man freed, but like one reborn. Within 48 hours, the police department announced Officer Reynolds was placed on unpaid suspension. The city council launched an emergency oversight hearing. Elijah's public defender, once dismissed as underfunded and overworked, was now being praised nationwide. But most importantly, Elijah's case was no longer about Elijah. It was about every black man who had been stopped, charged, and sentenced in silence. Weeks later, Elijah filed a civil lawsuit. Wrongful arrest, malicious prosecution, emotional distress. The city fought back hard. But this time, the evidence was airtight. The planted laptop, the officer's false report, the prosecution's attempt to hide body cam footage. And just 6 months later, a jury awarded Elijah $3.5 million in damages. But Elijah didn't pocket it all. He used the money to create a legal defense fund for others like him. He turned his pain into protection. On the 1-year anniversary of his arrest, Elijah stood in the same courthouse. This time not as a defendant, but as a guest speaker. He looked out at a room full of law students, activists, and families. I'm not here because I was innocent, he said. I'm here because I fought back. Innocence didn't save me, evidence did. Community did. You did. The crowd rose to their feet. Elijah didn't just walk out a free man. He walked out a changed one. The officer who planted the evidence? Fired. Charged. Disgraced. The prosecutor who withheld the footage? Suspended. Under ethics review. And Elijah Brooks? Now a symbol. A survivor. A speaker for the silenced. He walked into the courtroom as a number. He walked out as a name. Justice wasn't just served. It stood up and spoke loud. And this time, it spoke the truth. Subscribe for more true crime stories.